There are over 30 Spider-Man games that you can play on PC, but most of them are either lost to time, broken on modern hardware, or physically impossible to buy anywhere. I mean, who wants to pay $600 for a copy of Separation Anxiety? So after literal weeks of testing every single Spider-Man game and every version possible to play those games on PC, I've finally figured out which ones are actually worth your time, but most importantly, how to actually play them properly today, and which versions are the best. From forgotten handheld brawlers, straight up nightmare fuel, and of course some absolute bangers that deserve a remaster. Join me on a massive journey across the entire landscape of Spider-Man games, and I mean everything, even the mobile game releases, and answer the question, what is the best way to play every single Spider-Man game? But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Surfshark VPN. A bunch of the websites that I had to go on in order to make this video possible were sketchy to say the least, and Surfshark VPN helps here by encrypting all of my data. It also blocks ads, trackers, and in camouflage mode, it can even hide you from your internet service provider, meaning that no one is spying on you. Besides its amazing security features though, I've personally been using it to watch Spider-Man movies and TV shows on Netflix that I don't otherwise have access to here in the UK. I can basically switch it on, go to whatever country I want to digitally, and then watch the content that I paid for. These are only a few benefits from using Surfshark, but there are a tremendous amount of perks and features to this VPN that you can learn about on their website before you try it out yourself. And when you do want to give it a try, Surfshark is offering you guys 4 extra months with your purchase. You just need to use the link in the description and code RETRORENEW at checkout. And don't worry if it ends up not being for you, because they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out. So go protect yourself, get more out of the services that you pay for, and much, much more. Now let's get back to the video. To avoid a massive amount of bloat in this video of just repeating myself on certain settings or tools that I use, what I'm going to do is link a spreadsheet in the description that will go over every single emulator that I use in the video and what my personal optimized default settings are. There's also going to be some helpful notes for the ones that are personal preference or should be changed depending on your specs. Also, lossless scaling is a big one for every single game covered here. Basically, it's a program that uses frame generation in order to increase the cap of these older games. Therefore, whenever I'm saying that the game's capped to 30 or 60, technically it can go higher with lossless scaling, so that's going to be linked in the description as well. Now, if at any point you're unsure or confused about certain concepts, or you're just new to this whole thing, then what I'd recommend you doing is watching my Renew Older Games guide, which is going to be in the top right card or linked in the description. Not only is it heavily timestamped to help you go around and find what you're looking for, but it also features a massive link resource to help you with basically everything and anything that I'm going to talk about in this video. Lastly, unfortunately, I cannot share any game files for obvious reasons, but what I can do is tell you that you can go to Google and use terms like My Abandonware or ROM's Megathread, and this will be extremely helpful for basically every game featured here, unless I say otherwise. The first decade of Spider-Man games were, let's just say, experimental. In 1982, he got his first game aptly named Spider-Man for the Atari 2600. It's very basic. This little blob is Spider-Man, and he shoots his web, and the aim is to get to the top of this tower, avoiding Green Goblin. I'd recommend playing basically every game from this decade through RetroArch, as it's just going to make your life a whole lot easier. For this game, I recommend the Stellar core. There are some TV effects within this core that are pretty cool. This is always how I, in my head, see Atari games rather than the sharp default look. The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's Revenge. Jesus, that's a long name. It's definitely a video game, just a really bad one. I don't recommend this one. If you really are curious, then DOSBox Pure Core is probably the way to go. You have to select marvel.com in order to start the game. I tried some shaders with this one, but honestly, there's just not much you can do to hide how ugly this game is. Another game on this same core is The Amazing Spider-Man, which was released in 1990. This one, Spider-Man looks like a toddler who crawls around on all fours. R2-D2 is here as well, which is pretty cool. I have no idea why he's here. There was also a Questprobe game for Spider-Man in 1984. This is one of those games where you type in what you want to do, and it's like a text adventure. I had some fun typing some random stuff, and weirdly, I'd recommend you play this on browser. It's easy to find and is simple compared to setting it up for an emulator. It suits this kind of game too. Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, I'd play on the Sega Genesis version on RetroArch using the Genesis Plus GX core. This one opens with Kingpin framing Spider-Man and putting a bounty on his head. I honestly would feel bad for the guy, but it opens up with him straight up beating up a police officer in front of an old lady. This is not my Spider-Man. Spider-Man, the video game, the arcade game, man, these names are going to get confusing as hell. This was actually the first good game. This is just your average beat-em-up game where you play as Spider-Man, Black Cat, Hawkeye, and Namor? Okay. I'd recommend playing this in the Final Burn Neo core because something like Mayhem has honestly been the bane of my existence over the years using emulation. Final Burn Neo is just clean and simple to use. The controls are responsive and snappy unlike the other games around this era, and also the pixel art is really nice. The only thing I will say is that Spider-Man's proportions are a bit odd. He kinda looks like those guys dressed up as him for kids' birthday parties rather than straight from the comics. This is definitely by far the type of game that you want to play with a CRT shader. It looks absolutely stunning with something like CRT Guest Advance. It really just evokes that arcade feeling that this game was supposed to have, and I think it really livens up the image and also makes the pixel art that much more pretty. Unfortunately though, we aren't out of slop hell as we go right back downhill to The Amazing Spider-Man on the GameCube. It's just so unresponsive and weird, and I really don't have anything nice to say about it. I guess we are fighting random thugs and Mysterio in the first section, which is a lot better than some of the later games that have really wacky enemies. There were 2 sequels for this game for the Game Boy that I might as well get out of the way as well because my opinions are pretty much the same. The second one's walking animation is absolutely ridiculous. For all 3 of these, I just choose the Game Bait core in RetroArch. Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six is also the return of toddler Spider-Man for some reason. I don't know why so many games from this era had Spider-Man this tiny. I couldn't for the life of me figure out swinging as well. This game is another just bad one, I guess. I don't know if it's me just being not tolerant to these older games, just saying outright they're bad. I kind of feel bad for saying that these games aren't good, but I just could not for the life of me enjoy them, and I really tried. Play this on the Mason core, I think it's called, in RetroArch, and also for CRT shaders, I'd go with CRT Guest Advanced again. I was hoping we'd maybe get back to some beat-em-up games because I really think that suits Spider-Man in this era, but no, this one is another side-scrolling platformer that just feels as bad as all the others. SNES would be the core that I'd go for the SNES, as it's the most accurate from my experience. For SNES games in general, I'd go with CRT Geom over Guest Advanced. I think it just really encapsulates this era of games. Now we get an actual good one. I'd recommend this one. It's not incredible, but the comic book styled cutscenes are way more inspiring than the ones that we've had before, and the gameplay is the beat-em-up side-scroller that I was hoping these games would be. I don't like the shaded art style over what the arcade games look like. I think that kind of art style better suited this, but its combat is really responsive unlike the other games from this era, and the soundtrack is great too. There is a Sega Genesis and SNES version of this game, but the SNES is by far the better choice. It looks and sounds better than the Genesis version. The sequel feels roughly the same. Some would consider this one actually a downgrade over the original. I played this again on SNES over the Genesis version. The Amazing Spider-Man Lethal Foes was actually a Japan exclusive, but thanks to a ROM hack, you can actually patch in English translation. I used this site that I found online to apply the patch by just selecting the patch file, my ROM file, and then selecting an output for the patched version. It's a shame that this didn't get a worldwide release because I think people would have actually really liked it. It's mediocre, but a lot better than some of the other slop that we've been covering. This was only for the SNES, so just play it on that SNES core that I mentioned. Last game of this era is just another platformer that was only released on the 32X, which is an add-on for the Sega Genesis. Since it's only for one console, there's not really much I can recommend other than running it through RetroArch, with the Pico core. This is easily the first banger of this video. This one, I'm sure many of you are curious on what the best way to play is, including myself, because there are many versions, and honestly, a lot of them are quirky in different ways. Many, including myself, just think of this as a PS1 game, but honestly, the results from what I tested here were pretty surprising. Starting with the PS1 port, it has its fair share of issues and shortcomings. What I first noticed was that besides upping the internal resolution, there wasn't any widescreen patch. You can use the widescreen rendering feature within DuckStation, but this really does have mediocre results with stuff popping in and out around the corners as you play. PGXP support is also spotty here. The depth buffer option does not work without some extreme pop-in, so it's best to just leave that off but keep the core PGXP option on to avoid any wobble. The performance on this one is also just terrible, like absolutely terrible, especially outside. It just constantly dips to 20 FPS and overall just feels really janky to play. This is purely due to emulating the PS1 hardware, not anything to do with how fast your PC is. So the only way to actually get better frames here is to overclock that emulated PS1 through the emulation settings. In typical old game fashion though, setting this to 180% fixed all the FPS drops, but then introduced some game-breaking bugs. Most notably during the chase sequences with Venom and the Mysterio boss fight later on. I'm sure there are many others as well. You're going to encounter issues like just failing the missions because you didn't catch up to Venom in time. Basically, you need to then set your emulation overclock speed back down to 100% and just deal with the FPS drops during these sections. That's the only way to get past them, unfortunately. Unfortunately, loss of scaling is the only real remedy to get higher FPS. I would say it's mandatory, honestly, for all versions I tested. It will introduce some input lag as a trade-off, but setting the sync mode to none did help out quite a bit. The N64 of this game actually looks visually better in some ways. For example, the shadow here is more defined rather than a simple blob on the PS1 version. However, it just struggles basically anywhere else to get a win. It has zero widescreen support, and cutscenes are just screenshots of the original in a comic book style, which means no real-time cutscenes or FMVs here. Therefore, I'm pretty comfortable in just outright rejecting this port. I don't see any reason why you would go with this one, just the cutscenes alone just instantly write it off for me. The DreamCast version though is a total opposite of the N64 disappointment. This one features easily the best visuals across all the versions I tested. All of the models feature improved textures and a smoother, less wobbly appearance. These new character models also extend to the cutscenes as well, so the cutscenes are higher quality too. You can either play this one on the Flycast emulator or the core named Flycast as well within RetroArch. I chose to in the end go with RetroArch, but my settings for the individual emulator will also be in the spreadsheet that I mentioned. The settings are quite important here though. Flycast just does not play nice with Vulkan as of right now, so setting it to Direct 11 3D is an absolute must. This is done in the video output settings inside RetroArch. Widescreen is a thing for this version, but it's a bit jankier than the PS1. You have to enable the widescreen hack option and then force the game into 16:9 via the video settings. Cutscenes are going to look really weird here because the letterboxes don't go away, so they show on the top and bottom but don't extend to the full widescreen. The usual flickering around the edges on the DuckStation version are here as well too. When I explored these, I really didn't expect the Dreamcast version to be as good as people were saying it was to be, but yeah, I had a blast with this one, and I definitely would consider it better than the PS1 version. The PC version maybe would take the crown, but its combination of tons of steps to get set up properly on modern hardware, and also its lackluster feature set, I really do not think it's gonna be, but let's have a look anyway. You see, getting this all working is a chore and a half. It took me literally 30 minutes to get it working, and even then things were just breaking left, right and centre. So, where do I start? To even get a copy of the game, you gotta go second-hand hunting or sell the 7 Cs. The mentioned abandonware Google search in the beginning should sort you out. When you have it, you need to get DG Voodoo installed for this game to work properly. You need to obviously drag the exe and the config file, but also in the MS folder, then x86 folder, drag all of these DLLs in here to make sure that it works. You'll also want to open this DG Voodoo control panel and change the video card within the DirectX tab to 9800 GT and also the VRAM to 1024. You can also set your resolution here, set anti-aliasing if you want to, and set VSync to disabled. DG Voodoo watermark is on by default as well, so turn that off too. Now it's also important that you open up the DG Voodoo comp file with something like Notepad++ and make sure that the FPS limit here is set to 30. Anything over 30 will cause you issues. I wished and hoped it was gonna be that simple, but no, we need 2 more mods. Spidey tools and Spider-Man settings. Both are GitHub pages and you just download the latest release. For Spidey tools, you need to open the texture loader folder, and before you drag these 2 files in, you gotta add an underscore to the end of the file named binkw32. Now I tried to get controller support working, but man, this game was having none of it at all. It works for the most part, especially with something like Steam Input if you run it through as a non-Steam game, but still, even then, it's janky at best. Basically, any controller made after 2001, it just will not play nice with it. The biggest problem that I faced was that I couldn't bind the swing button to the same button as jump, nor did it let me bind a different key, as the only buttons that ended up working were the D-pad and the face buttons. The FMVs also seem to be the sharpest, but kinda to their detriment because they're extremely jaggy around the edges. To sour the mood again though, the game just crashes upon alt-tabbing. It's extremely picky when it comes to any program that attempts to force windowed mode, so I couldn't find a solution to this. All in all, I gotta say the best version is the DreamCast port. I'm confident in recommending that one, either through RetroArch or the individual emulator. For people that want to play on PS1 though, I think it's a solid second pick. Just be careful around overclocking the game and take my advice on the other stuff to hopefully make it a more smoother experience. I'd avoid the others though. There is a PC decompile project that is going on that if it ever gets a full release, no doubt the PC would probably jump to the top of the list. Recompiling the game into a new PC port would just open up so many nice quality of life features that this dated one is seriously lacking. If you want more of this game, then luckily for you it got a sequel. But it is a really safe, less innovative one that treads a lot of the same ground as the original. It's also just as short as the original, so there isn't much game to play here at only 6 hours. It's really annoying that they didn't fix the camera or character controls here because it just feels like you're often fighting the camera rather than the actual enemies themselves. This game is just challenging, but not really in a fun or interesting way. Anyway, this game is only published for PlayStation, so there's not much to explore here. You can pretty much just copy the advice and breakdown of the first game on DuckStation over to this. Now between this and the eventual debut of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, we got some more Game Boy games. Despite having a different name, I think judging by the cover art, this was supposed to be Spider-Man Enter Electro, but on Game Boy Color. And you can just play it within RetroArch on the Gambate core. I think Gambate is how you actually pronounce it, not Game Bait as I was saying before. Classic British guy stuff, just mispronouncing words left and right. Anyway, let's move on. Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace is just another one of these bog standard type of games, but it's on the Game Boy Advance instead, so use the GBA core here. This has pretty cool comic styled cutscenes, and not gonna lie, from the smooth swinging animations and snappy controls, as well as the cool music, it's definitely one of the better handheld Spidey games I played, and I'd actually recommend trying this one out. We must now leave this early 3D era behind though, and enter what is probably the most nostalgic time for a lot of Spider-Man fans out there, including me. And that's the introduction of the Raimi trilogy, or Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man as a whole. And so in true 2000s fashion, this could only mean one thing. With great movies comes great movie tie-in games. This game, my god, this game. If you rip the nostalgia and Spider-Man away, is it a bad movie tie-in game? Yes. But man, do I have so many memories with this game. The music, the cheat code where you get to play as Green Goblin, and of course the goofy dialogue.
What's with the getup?
Starting with the PS2 version, where there isn't really much to say or do about it, there's no patches for it, so you're stuck with 4x3. I'd consider setting Vulkan as the renderer as a must here, and also overclocking in the emulation setting to at least 130, but ideally 180%, which will clean up a lot of the stutters that this game is plagued with. Lastly, this game heavily relies on mip-mapping, which is just going to do things like make these building textures look so low quality. They are basically being substituted for lower res ones, so switching off mip-mapping within the settings reveals their true full resolution. Moving on to Dolphin, again, super disappointing, there's no patches here. The good thing about Dolphin though is you can use the built-in widescreen hack to force widescreen properly without it stretching. It does cause objects and effects to disappear too early on the edges of screen like it usually does for most of this widescreen stuff, but I would much rather play this than the PS2 4x3 version. Frame rate from my experience was also definitely improved on this one over PSX2. It did have a hitch here and there while it compiled the shaders, but besides that it was locked to a smooth 60. I feel like the GameCube has the sharper visuals here, but it is a bit desaturated compared to the PS2, and also the shadows are really weird on the Dolphin emulator. They are just totally misaligned and warp quite a bit when you move around. This isn't a widescreen hack thing either, as this happens on the native 4x3 without the hack enabled. I'm surprised, shocked, but also stoked at the fact that the original Xbox version running on the XEMU emulator is probably the best version out of all of them. This feels like a huge milestone on the channel because often we cover this emulator and every time we're disappointed by the lack of widescreen patching or 60 FPS patching, but here it's just a whole new level. It's by far got the superior graphics, and best of all, it has a widescreen patch. It's the only one out of all three of these that actually has one. The downside is that it is more tedious to set up than its counterparts, but all you need is this patched XBE file, which I'll link down below. All you need to do is drag your Xbox ROM onto the extract-xiso exe, which is a tool that will extract all of the files from it. Then inside that folder, you just replace the default XBE with the patched one. To repackage it into an ISO, you right-click an empty space in the folder, open in terminal and paste this code. Copy it here or from the description. Change the name if your ROM doesn't match, and then hit enter. You gotta make sure to force 16:9 in the settings for this to function properly. And also use Vulkan, OpenGL is extremely choppy. I can't believe after 8 months on this channel we have finally broke the XEMU curse and found a game that actually runs and looks its best here. I'm sure someone could make a widescreen patch for the PS2 or GameCube version if they really tried, but as it stands as of this point I cannot find a widescreen patch for those versions. This game also has a PC port, but man is it a total stinker. First up, it does the usual 2000s PC port stuff of just being totally broken by default. A fix from GitHub by the community does a wonderful job at fixing it though. You can adjust the FOV resolution and set frame rate limits with this one, and going in game, the first bug that you'll encounter is the FMVs, where they're really super tiny and completely unwatchable, you know, unless you're Stuart Little or something. Going in game, the textures are just so bad. The shadows also are bad compared to the others. It's just a blob. Also, controllers, it's just a nightmare to get set up and the buttons just don't work properly. I had to cut this one short just for the sake of my sanity. Lastly, this game is yet another that has a Game Boy Advance port, but it's just a simple side-scroller, nothing like the original. I'd recommend first that you try the Xbox original version on the XEMU, but if you really do not want to patch your game with a widescreen patch, then Dolphin is the next best thing. We're ditching Spider-Man flying around, swinging his webs off of clouds. We now have physics-based web swinging. Also, forget linear levels, we now have a full open world to explore. Now let's first head into the PS2 version of the game running on the PSX2 emulator. I'm sure many of you relate to me when I say that this was the version that I played as a kid, and it's the one that I have the most nostalgia for. But over the past few years, it's also been one of the hardest ones to emulate. Before PSX2 got its 2.0 update, it used to basically not work at all unless you ran it in software mode. But we've come a long way from that, and now in its current form, it runs really well. We obviously can enhance it a lot from this native setting though, so my recommendation would be to first enable all of the patches for the game by going to the Game Properties menu, Patches, and then for this game we have a widescreen and 60 FPS patch. Widescreen is a no-brainer, but for the 60 FPS one, you should use a little bit of caution here. Using it may introduce frame drops, stutters, and bugs. If you want to try it out though, I would recommend that you enable it and then go to Emulation tab and then set the EE cycle rate to 130% overclock or higher. You might also want to try setting this to 300%, but 130% is a decent baseline here. Now in terms of visual enhancements like texture packs, we are pretty out of luck here unfortunately. Only the UI and font has been able to be upscaled by the community. This does make the UI look extremely clean though, so it's not all bad. It's just a shame that this version was stuck with these super low res textures that now stick out due to the high internal resolution. The same can't be said for the GameCube version running on Dolphin though. The performance on this one is so smooth. And then piling on the benefits, the visuals are way better too. There's an overall bump in fidelity, with textures looking slightly more sharp, and most noticeably, the LOD on some of the background details such as these buildings are way less harsh, with overall draw distance being better. On the PS2 version, these buildings are just blocks, whereas here, you can slightly define that they have some texture to them, and the same goes for the trees in this shot. The only issue is the sky texture has always been bugged for me in this version, which does take away a bit from the positives that we've been talking about. I'm not sure if this is just bugged for me, or it's bugged like this on original hardware, but honestly, for years this texture has looked like this. Also, if you right click your game, go Properties and then AR Codes tab, you can add 16:9 widescreen support as well as a 60 FPS patch by copying the codes that you see on screen here. And just like PCSX 2, I'd also recommend that you overclock the CPU to the max setting of 400% if you can. This may cause issues again, so be cautious. Now, like I've hinted at, besides the original native quality of the game being overall better, we can also apply some textures here. The entire game has been upscaled thanks to the Spider-Man 2 RE mod. This really does speak for itself, and in terms of getting the best looking game possible quickly, this is going to be the way to go. It also fixes the sky bug that we mentioned as well. I couldn't verify this, but looking at the textures up close, the majority of them do look upscaled rather than by hand or remade, but there were exceptions to this rule, like, for example, the rooftop textures I believe have been replaced here, as they do not match the original colour. Some billboards have also been replaced entirely. As well as improving the textures, this mod is chock full of options. For example, there are tons of different controller layout button options. There's 4 different webbing styles that you can choose from, loads of different HUD elements from loads of different games, as well as the one that was showed at E3. And then most importantly, suit mods. Even though it's not implemented seamlessly in the gameplay, it's really nice that we can quickly swap out different costumes, as in the original, this was one of the Spider-Man games that does not have any alternate costumes. These are actually really well made as well. Some of my favourites here was the Spectacular Spider-Man suit, TASM 2, the MCU one, and of course there's both Spider-Man 1 and 2 versions of the Raimi suit. In terms of the Spider-Man 2 suits, there's actually quite a few that you can choose from, and if you really want to stick to the original look of the game, you can also replace it with the Xbox version of the suit, which is just a higher res version of the original than the PS2 or GameCube version. Now, even if we ignore the texture pack entirely, I still think overall it's slightly ahead of the PS2 version. When I was quickly switching between both versions, I just had more fun playing the GameCube version, and the texture pack only heightened that enjoyment. That's basically everything that I feel is important to know about these two versions, but the next one that we're going to look at is far superior in almost every way, but it's really let down by one big factor, and that's the Xbox version running on the XEMU emulator. Right out the gate, you can instantly see just how sharper the visual representation is here. Spidey's suit is looking sharper, colours and contrast pop a little bit more, and effects like the glow on these windows here at nighttime look the best on the Xbox version. There are also some new effects added as well, like this pretty cool ghosting effect during combat to really exaggerate Spider-Man's speed. Across all three, this is definitely the best graphics wise. There's no real contest here. However, since XEMU is a little bit less robust of an emulator, our options are quite limiting. Things were looking pretty good for this version until I got to actually playing it. The audio during combat gets incredibly distorted for some reason.
Come on, get to the car!
And turning on the only option in the audio settings that I hoped would fix it did nothing. There are also some visual bugs that I could instantly notice. There was some popping up in the cutscenes and when swinging around. Therefore, overall, I'm pretty confident in just recommending the GameCube version running on the Dolphin emulator with the mentioned texture pack. This is by far the most fun and enjoyment overall that I've had out of this game in years, especially with those custom suits. The performance is snappy, the visuals amazing, and there really wasn't any bugs that I could really spot. Also, if you really want that PS2 experience, you can just replace the textures with the PS2 buttons like we mentioned, and then also change the controls inside Dolphin to match the PS2 controls, making the game basically just feel like you're playing the PS2 version anyway. There is a PC version of the game, but don't go thinking it's the same game. It's completely different, it's made by completely entirely different devs. The only resemblance here is the music and the sound effects, and of course being tied to the same movie. Instead of getting a massive open world with full control over your web swinging, this is a linear experience where you left-click web icons to swing, meaning that you have very little control on where you want to actually go. People clown on this game a lot, and whilst it is something that looks very quickly cobbled together, I think it's a lot better than some of the other games that we've explored. I ended up playing it way more than I thought I would. It's simple, don't get me wrong, but it was built from the ground up to run on PC, and so it's super responsive. I had this game running at my native 240Hz refresh rate with no FPS cap needed, and at widescreen resolution with no patch either. It does however require that you tinker two INI files though, user and webhead INI. You can find these in the game directory after you've loaded the game up and tinkered with the settings to make sure that the values pop up. After some tinkering, here are the best settings that I found to set up in order to get widescreen, fix the mouse smoothing, and also some other stuff like setting your refresh rate. These are their exact names, so just search for these in the INI and set them accordingly. Besides this version, there are also two others that play completely different. The PSP one is very much like the first movie game, in which it's a basic linear experience with no open world or webs that attach to buildings. For the time though, I remember having a lot of fun with this one as a kid, despite its simplicity. You'd want to use the PPSSPP emulator for this. Here are my settings in case you want to pause and copy them. The DS version is definitely lesser than the PSP, but I gotta say it's not terrible. Ultimate Spider-Man I could gush over all day. I absolutely love this game to bits. It's probably just under the Insomniac games for me if I were to rank all of the games. My only gripe with this game, besides the difficulty being weirdly tuned, is the fact that it's short. Like, I want more of this game. It's only about 6 hours long. I would just kill for a new Ultimate Spider-Man game or just a comic book styled Spider-Man game in the modern era. We start our journey with a PS2 port running on the PCSX2 emulator. Firstly, the only patch for this game within the PCSX2 settings was a 60 FPS one. This meant at first I was running the game at the original 4:3 ratio to get a feel for the version. Another thing I instantly noticed about this version was that certain UI elements like the QuickTime event bar and the arrow that directs you to the objective have a weird, jaggy, crimpled look to them, which instantly made me wonder if that was how they were supposed to look, but no, they're supposed to be clean lines like this. Another thing is that the textures on buildings go super low res at a very short distance. I'm pretty sure this is MIP mapping, and it's in the original PS2 version of the game, but on the emulator here you can turn off MIP mapping within the settings, and it does fix the buildings, but just breaks every other textures, so never mind using that. Now let's move on to the Dolphin emulator running the GameCube version of the game. Now this version doesn't have the awful MIP mapping that the PS2 version does, so in my opinion it overall looks better. If you right click the game and go to Properties, go Gecko Codes, add a code and enter these details, which will be in the description, you'll get widescreen support. Now onto the original Xbox port. It's an amazing port combined with a lackluster emulator, which make for an interesting mixed bag of pros and cons. Firstly, it has superior visuals. It also not only runs at 60 FPS natively, but the XEMU for me and a lot of others runs super well on modern systems. For cons, no native widescreen or patch is a huge letdown. It means the only way to play in 16:9 is to deal with a stretched image. The PC version is a port of the superior Xbox version, and so it features those super crisp graphics, better draw distance, but also the Z-viting bug. Let's first go through the technical tweaks that you're going to need in order to get this version up to scratch. Firstly, get the widescreen fix and just drag and drop it into the main directory of the game. After that, open the config INI file within the scripts folder. Fix HUD is going to be set to 1 by default. This makes the HUD perfectly scaled like the GameCube version, but it does also break the map, making it non-existent. The little dots that you need to follow though are still there, so it's still usable. Setting this to 0 though makes the UI stretched but keeps the game in the correct proportion, and it also restores the map's function. This is up to you, but I much prefer having the map and I don't mind the UI being stretched, so I left this at 0. Now with all the technical steps out the way, how does this port actually feel to play? Well, to put it simply, it was in my opinion the most amazing in terms of visuals and smoothness. Every version tested today also crashed a total of 0 times, so I don't think you have to worry about that no matter which port you choose. The PC version took a bit to get set up of course, but once all of it was up and running, it's such a great way to play. Now the other versions of the game are standalone titles that are different, they're made by different devs entirely, and that's the DS version, which is definitely a lot more fun than say the Game Boy Advance version. The Game Boy Advance is good with really nice animations and a clean pixel art aesthetic, but the DS features fully voiced cutscenes over the silent GBA ones, and overall the gameplay is more varied. You have to use the pen and swipe in the DS version as well. You can still do this on PC by just using a mouse. My recommended emulator here is Melon DS for DS games. Overall, to summarize all the ports, in my opinion the best overall is still the PC version. Despite its complex and long-winded setup, it offers the best visuals, native 60 FPS support, widescreen, and brilliant performance. It does feel weird to crown this as the best version to play, as it does come with its fair share of downsides, but the reason is personal, and it comes down to the fact that it's so sharp and smooth to play. If you want to get the best visuals and performance and are willing to put up with the quirks, then it will be a great experience. If you however hate tweaking with PC games and just want something that's extremely easy to set up, then you can't go wrong with the Xbox or Dolphin version. You have to decide whether you want 60 FPS or true widescreen support. Dolphin will be locked at 30 FPS unless you find a way to get a 60 FPS patch working, and the Xbox version runs natively at 60 FPS, but will have to be played at either 4:3 or stretched 16:9. Speaking of DS games, Ultimate Spider-Man actually got a sequel that was restricted to this platform specifically. There's probably a lot of you out there that don't know that Ultimate Spider-Man technically did get a sequel. It was initially going to be the full-blown console level sequel, but was cancelled down to this. The story is actually a prequel to the first one. Spider-Man 3 is a tricky one because I personally played this religiously on the PS2, which does mean it has quite a bit of nostalgia for me, but that being said, it's notoriously rough around the edges.
I'm going to die!
And not only that, but this is where these Spider-Man games just start to get so many versions and ports that it just gets ridiculously hard to kind of decipher all of it. Starting with the PS2 version, it runs like absolute garbage on the PS6 emulator. At first I was, to be honest, using OpenGL with the blending accuracy on full, but when I set it to basic accuracy and switched to Vulkan, it was noticeably more playable. It's just still not good. The other annoying thing here is the lack of patches, so this game is stuck at 30 FPS and in 4:3. Overall, it's a real mess, and it's somewhat surprising that, a Spider-Man title is this neglected, but I get it. There's probably only a handful of people that this is their favourite Spidey game, so the neglect is somewhat annoying, but also valid. The only other version that looks like the PS2 version is the Wii, which runs a bit better and can be played in widescreen thanks to the Dolphin's built-in hack, but obviously it's got loads of motion controls built in, so it just makes it that much more annoying to play. For example, besides QuickTime events, you also need to swing the Wiimote around to just do simple things like punching. Within the controller settings of Dolphin, you can actually set it up so when you press a button, it will shake the Wiimote, and that's the only way I found out how to actually play this game without having to, get out the original hardware. The other version of this game that is identical across other versions is the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. This version is like the version of the game, if that makes sense. This is the one that has the most development behind it, being that it was on the most up-to-date systems of the time. The PS3 version runs really well on the RPCS3 emulator, but it's an emulator that, despite being incredible, isn't fully there yet in terms of performance and compatibility. This game is actually, however, fully playable according to the wiki, and on the first level it ran perfectly. It's important to enable right color buffers to avoid some lighting issues. Also, I'd recommend not only upscaling the resolution, but also setting V-blank frequency to 120 or 240 in the advanced settings. 120Hz will get you 60 FPS from the default 30, and then 240 will let you run at 120. This was amazing to play this game at 120 FPS, and despite the frame times being a bit choppy, it felt really smooth. The only issue was that when I stepped outside, it tanked well below 60. I think depending on your system, you'll either have to play this at just the native 720p res of the PS3, or play around with the settings quite a bit. The 360 version also surprisingly works on Xenia Canary quite a bit. What you'll want to do for this emulator going forward is use something called Xenia Manager. It's basically like a front-end UI for the emulator. Otherwise, without it, you'll have to dive into INI settings to get stuff set up. Here are the settings that I used. These upscale the game to 1440p, just like our PCS3 had set up, and also lets you play at 60 FPS. I was actually really surprised how well this game plays. A lot of games on Xenia Canary just straight up don't work, so the fact that not only was it working, but it was running really well was pretty good. But those emotions quickly sunk when I entered the free roam part of the game. This must be the reason the game is set to in-game only on the compatibility page. It's not fully playable just yet, basically making our PCS3 win this encounter. But maybe the PC can swing in for the crown? Yeah, no. It's not terrible, but there's just loads of bugs here. This is your classic run-of-the-mill old PC port that is based off the console versions, specifically the PS3 version in this case. But it breaks and removes so many little details that were in that version that it just makes it feel really lacking in comparison. For example, mip mapping and effects are just totally broken. They either cause graphical glitches or are just not there entirely. Stuff like bloom or pretty much any post-processing for that matter are just not here. There is a fix that can just be drag and dropped into the game directory. This will allow it to go above 30 FPS, but it still feels pretty bad to run. Overall, this one's an easy avoid for me. Unless it's absolutely unnecessary that you need to play on a PC port rather than emulation, I would just avoid this one at all costs. If you do really want to give it a shot though, you need to make sure that you turn off full screen effects within the settings, as that causes a lot of issues, and also apply the mentioned patch to make sure you get somewhat a decent experience. Lastly, there's the handheld ports. There isn't really much to say here that's not already been said in the video before. PSP is actually not a different game, but rather just a really stripped back version of the PS2 game, and then the DS and Game Boy Advance are totally different from one another. Spider-Man Friend or Foe is one of those games that you absolutely adore as a kid. I remember spending hours upon hours in this game, especially the fact that it had local co-op so that you could play with, siblings or friends, but playing it today as an adult, it just isn't the same. I still do think it's a fantastic game though. Playing it for this video reminded me of how well it's held up. I found the controls easy and snappy, animations fluid, especially the web grapple attack, and graphics are still amazing due to the cartoony art style. The level design is quite basic, and also you're fighting very generic enemies throughout the game, but the amazing roster of characters here make me very happy that it exists. It's like a fun kiddie version of Ultimate Alliance dedicated to the Spider-Man universe. This is also directly taken out of the Raimi verse. The PS2 was the version that I played the most, and it runs absolutely amazingly at max blending accuracy, and also includes a widescreen and 60 FPS patch. As with a lot of these patches, it's recommended that you overclock to 180% in the emulation settings, as then you'll reach that new 60 FPS target a whole lot better. It also didn't cause any issues in my albeit short time playing. The Wii version is almost identical, but doesn't have the same kind of patches that the PCS2 has, and it also suffers from relying on motion controls, so I would skip out on this one. This game was also ported to the next generation of consoles, but they completely glossed over the fact that the PS3 existed. I have a feeling it's probably due to that console's complexity. I think this one might actually be completely playable on Xenia Canary, but I can't confirm that. However, I played the entirety of the first level with no problems at all. This one is a whole lot darker overall than the others, but I think in most part it's due to the fact that there is ambient occlusion in this version. I really think it makes the game pop a whole lot more as well. I think ambient occlusion adds so much to these type of games, like the fact that this fence here on the right, on the Xbox 360 version, it just looks so much more part of the world, like there is shadows being casted from everywhere, whereas on the PS2 version it just looks very flat. It also runs at 60 FPS and widescreen by default without any patches needed. The only issue that I found was the robots were flickering sometimes at certain points. Besides that, there were no graphical or game-breaking issues. I still don't want to recommend this one. Like, I don't want to recommend it to you guys and then your save get corrupted halfway through or something, so I would still stick to the PS2 version. But if you want to try it out, it's a really good version and it's better in terms of visuals. Surprisingly though, the PC version of this game basically fixes any worries that I had with the 360 version, and since it's a port of that version, you actually get the visuals from it. The only thing that you need to do to get this working is just drag Chip's PC fix into the games directory, and then open up the D3D9 INI file and adjust it accordingly, like set your resolution correctly and also enable borderless windowed mode if you want to do that. This fix is a godsend, to be honest, because it does all the heavy lifting for you. Now the game just works perfectly on modern hardware, and also the settings inside the game, you can enable things like anti-aliasing and of course turn up the graphical quality. 5 minutes into playing this game, I knew instantly that the PC was 100% the one that I'd recommend. So unless you really want to use emulation, in which case I'd go for the PCSX2, the PC is def the recommendation here. Before we look at what is another one of my favourite Spider-Man games of all time, I want to show you quickly the underbelly of Spider-Man games. The games that very, very rarely get mentioned, but not because they are bad, but because most of them don't exist anymore, and that is some mobile games. Being that they are on mobile, it's often harder to preserve them. Phones don't really have that same customization that PC has, and not to mention the fact that when people hear mobile games, they often think of games like this. These though are competent, full-blown games. This one is based on the Ultimate Spider-Man comics and plays like a basic linear Spider-Man game, something very akin to Shattered Dimensions. This, not gonna lie, was a nightmare to get running, especially since this was my first time ever playing an Android game on PC in a very, very long time. Bluestacks is often the go-to for the Android emulator, as well as LPD Player. LPD Player can offer better performance, but I managed to get it working on Bluestacks, whereas I didn't on the other one. It did, however, still require a lot of trial and error. The important things to know is that you need to have virtualization enabled on your PC in order for this to function properly at all. Without this, your game is just going to look very broken. This could be enabled by default, it was for me, but if it's not, or you're just curious if it is or not, then you can use the link down in the description, because I'm not going to be able to give you a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, as it's going to be different for every single machine. I tried the latest version of Bluestacks, which is 5, and it just did not work at all. 4 also technically failed, as it just crashed within the first 5 seconds, but the important thing about this one is that you need to get the Hyper-V version in order to work flawlessly. Now what worked for me might not work for you, but I'm just kind of recounting my experience on my PC and how I got it set up. But the thing that I had to do was download the Hyper-V version and then make sure that I have hyper-virtualization enabled within my Windows control panel. This can cause issues with other emulators, so I'd recommend turning it off after you're done. To actually get your hands on a copy, you need to search Spider-Man Total Mayhem Internet Archive. For controls, I found out the best way to use a controller or keyboard is to use the on-screen editor via the keyboard icon on the right. You want to use the tap icons and the D-pad. You're supposed to click here and then click a button on the controller, but that wasn't working for me. What I had to do was click the cog icon and then go into the gamepad settings and input the keys there. To make it easier for you, because not all the buttons show up straight away in game, this is where I would set up my keys and what buttons I specifically set them to. Spider-Man Unlimited is by far one of the best Spider-Man mobile games from my experience, but unfortunately it was taken away from us a few years ago. However, you can still play this, and by far the best way to do so is the custom build by Spidey Hub. I'll link their Discord below. You can find a patched APK file there that features a ton of custom characters amongst other improvements. The community there recommend to play it on LDP player rather than Bluestacks, so that's what I did, and it worked flawlessly. Playing on PC was a bit of a learning curve because you have to obviously use your mouse instead of a touchscreen, but seeing this game for the first time in widescreen was crazy. Web of Shadows is absolutely incredible, but the issue is that it's plagued by being on consoles that are harder to emulate, and also has a PC port that needs a bit of work. I've previously covered this on the channel, but a lot has changed since then, so I have some extra advice and corrections. What I didn't cover, however, was the more obscure versions, like the PS2 one. I'm a victim of buying this game as a kid, thinking that it was going to be like the 360 or PS3 versions. A 2.5D side-scroller is not really what I had in mind. It's not a bad game to be honest, but also nothing special, and kid me honestly just stopped playing it after a few minutes because I was so mad. It still hurts me that this game exists with such a similar cover art, so out of spite, I'm going to give it the same respect that it gave me as a kid and just disregard it. Now for the actual game, starting with a PC port, you need to first make sure that you're on the 1.1 version of the game. If you're unsure, then just patch it anyway. Then head to your local app data folder. You can do this by just typing % local app data % in the start menu. You'll find a config file there. In here, make sure that you have video W and H set to your monitor's resolution, and then add these 3 lines here. Set windowed to 0 for full screen or 1 for windowed. Keep the CPU count and video hertz the same no matter your PC specs. The hertz line is going to cap the game to 60, which is crucial. If it don't cap it, then you need to make sure to do it manually because anything over 60 is going to totally break the game. To be honest, it's actually recommended that you set this to 30, however I found it's okay to play at 60, but you are still going to need to cap it to 30 at certain points. For example, there's a certain Kingpin mission which will just give you a black screen and basically soft lock you. You have to set the game to 30 to get past this screen and then set it back to 60 afterwards. Basically, if you ever encounter a bug or you load your save and it's just a black screen, cap the FPS to 30 and it should fix it. In the launcher, I'd recommend these settings, and in-game I'd use anything but the default high brightness setting because that is way too blown out. The game also has no anti-aliasing, so you're going to have to use Reshade or your GPU control panel. Now for the PS3 version on the RPCS3 emulator, there isn't really much you can do besides setting the Z-call frequency to something like 120 to get 60 FPS. From my experience, setting this version to 60 FPS isn't as bad as setting the PC version. It tends to be okay at 60 FPS, but you might again need to set it to 30 at certain points. This one is honestly really solid and in my opinion looks better than the PC version. The Xbox version though is by far the best looking, but Xenia Canary really does let it down in terms of compatibility and smoothness. So whilst I would recommend the Xbox 360 version, I wouldn't exactly recommend the emulator that it's running on. The Wii version is something that I haven't covered before, which is funny because despite it being an extremely stripped back version, it's still the same game, and in fact has some exclusive content like additional suits. It's so weird that out of all the versions, this is the one to get special costumes, but it's still not enough to consider it as a strong contender, despite being really cool. Therefore, my recommendation have honestly changed since I last looked at this. I used to say that you would play the Xbox 360 version, but due to how that emulator just really can be hit or miss, I'm going to actually recommend the PS3 version as the best if you want a plug and play experience with, no nonsense involved. But PC, if you're willing to set it up properly, is definitely the way to go as it's way easier to run and it lacks that harsh PS3 emulation overhead. Also, the PC version has loads of suits online through mods, so that's definitely a plus for the PC version. Shattered Dimensions is basically a Spider-Verse game before it was cool, and it pains me to talk about this one because honestly there really isn't a definitive answer. I've covered this one on the channel before and I was so frustrated trying to get the PC version working to no avail. It was just stuttering beyond belief. Having tried it again for this video though, it's still the same frustrating mess that I remember. There are a few new things that I found out though. When I made that video, I was using the retail version of the PC game. That's the one that you'd get on a disc. However, the creator of the fix mod said to me that his experience, people have been having way less issues when they use the Steam version instead. Of course, the issue is you can't actually get the Steam version as it's been delisted, so you'll need to head over to the lovely Spoon Lady. If you're unsure what I'm talking about, if you theoretically was to look for it, then I'd go to Google and I'd search this. At this point, I kept optimistic and tried to get it working, but it didn't even work. Like, it didn't even get past the intro screen. It was that bad. I spent about an hour troubleshooting it before just giving up. I'm absolutely sick of this damn PC port taking years off my life. I've got a pretty big hunch though that nothing I could do would fix it, as I'm running a modern AMD CPU, and I think that's what's messing with it. It could also be driver issues or Windows updates, I have no clue. Hopefully if you try it out you have no issues. If you do, it's very important that you get Chip Biscuit's fix. This is the same fix for all of the other Spider-Man games that we've been covering, and it's a simple drag and drop and then tuning the INI to your liking. This should fix frame rate issues and eliminate stuttering, but it still does not fix a certain crash that might happen during the Goblin boss fight in the 2099 level. There are 3 methods to get past this, and all of them are listed on his GitHub page, so if you need help, go over there. RPCS 3 is definitely the way to go if the PC version doesn't work out for you. You can set the V-blank to 120 to get 60 FPS, but getting 60 FPS in this game is quite hard, especially in the 2099 levels. You might need to revert back to 30 again in specific situations in case it crashes. At least it runs though. The Xbox is a no-go. It just does not work currently on Xenia Canary. It's really odd to me that these Spider-Man games have so many strange, almost unnecessary ports. Like, the Wii versions are just killing me at this point in the video. It's technically a console of the same generation, so I guess it makes sense that they would make a game for it. The Wii is just a slightly more powerful GameCube essentially, so making a game at this magnitude and just cramming it down onto a Wii was always not going to be that desirable. Overall for me, RPCS 3 is basically the only way to go. I would like to play the PC version, but it just doesn't really want me to. I've seen many people in the community and elsewhere run it fine though, and especially those on lower end systems or older hardware, PC version with chips fix is probably the way to go. This one is pretty cut and dry to be honest, because there was never a PC port for it, and the 360 version, to no one's surprise, does not work at all. I tried both renderers, but it was just either a black screen or visually broken. Thankfully though, RPCS 3 runs this game perfectly. It's fully playable start to finish. You can also set it to 60 FPS through the V-blank frequency. We now enter the Andrew Garfield era of Spider-Man, and man, were his games rough. I mean, they aren't terrible, but they were definitely developed under pretty strict deadlines, and it really shows in the final product. Both this game and its sequel are definitely rough around the edges. Let's just start with the PC version, as it's a good baseline to compare others to. This one has a chip fix again, like the other Spider-Man games, so that's going to give you a good head start and, set your resolution correctly, as well as give you the ability to adjust FOV and set your windowed mode. It's worth pointing out as well that if chips fix does not work for you, then installing DXVK could be the next best thing, especially if you're on an AMD graphics card, as Vulkan can alleviate some of the issues with these kind of rigs. You can also run this on RPCS 3, which it does run pretty well, although I have to admit I'm leaning towards more the PC version here because RPCS 3 can be a bit harder to run. Of course, if you're having stuttery issues in PC though, then the RPCS 3 would be the backup, because the Xbox 360 one, no surprise, it just doesn't work. The surprise in all of this though is definitely the mobile version, because unlike the handheld versions, this one is actually open world. It's still a far cry from what we have on the PC and console versions, and I'll admit I haven't played this version or the handheld versions enough to truly compare them, but I remember playing the mobile version quite a bit, and remember the swinging being really competent for a mobile game. I gotta say though, overall, if you're looking to play that main console version, then overall the PC is going to be my recommendation, and if that does not work, then go with the PS3 running on RPCS 3. Now, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is a contender for most ports, I think. I don't know which one actually comes out on top in terms of that, but this one was released on PC, PS4, PS3, Xbox One, Xbox 360, 3DS, Wii U, mobile. Like, it's pretty much on everything. And I hate to do a bit of a cop-out here, but this is quite a modern game, right? So honestly, you can pretty much take what I said about the first game and apply it here. It's not as broken as that game. It runs basically identically on PC, for example, and it doesn't feature a fix like the first one does, but I don't really think it needs it. If you experience any stuttering though, you're going to have to grab DXVK, and that hopefully should alleviate it, as most of these Beanox PC games suffer from stuttering anyway. I personally would say the PC is hands down the instant winner, and that's only because the PC is based off of the Xbox One and PS4 games, and so they have the better graphics over, say, running it on RPCS 3. And of course, something like Shad PS4 isn't there just yet to run the PS4 version or the Xbox One as well, so basically, just go with the PC version. Just to mention it though, it is playable on RPCS 3, it's just far inferior in terms of visuals. The mobile, again, is the standout if you want to play a different version of the game though. It's a totally different game, but it is still an open world game, and it's got really competent and fun mechanics. That then brings us into the modern era of Spidey games, where Beenox passed the lantern over to Insomniac, in which they created what is by far my favourite Spider-Man game to date. In fact, this game's story is up there with the best Spidey stories ever in my opinion. My job here on this channel is pretty much redundant here, like there isn't really much I can say about this, you play it on Steam, you play it on PC. The same is true for Miles Morales and also Spider-Man 2. All three of these definitely have their quirks in terms of PC performance, they are not perfect ports, but I've been playing a lot of Marvel Spider-Man 2 recently, and it's worked pretty flawlessly on my machine. The graphic settings in-game are basically the only thing that you need to tweak, and there are loads of better videos out there than I could ever make. Also the modding scene, you have to check out the modding scene. Nexus mod is chock full of incredible suits for all three games, and also the swinging mods are so fun, especially the first game's one. As compared to the sequels, it's a lot slower to swing around in that game due to hardware limitations, so some of the swing speed and momentum tweaks to the first game are much appreciated because they do bring it more in line with the sequels and make it easier to go back to the older game. And that is every single Spider-Man game. Honestly, I'm completely worn out at this point. I really underestimated how much work this would be, but I pulled through because it was a lot of fun in the end. Of course, I didn't want to go as in-depth as I usually do per game. I usually spend about 15 to 25 minutes yapping about a certain game, and I didn't want to do that each game for this video because not only will the video be like 5 hours long, but I'd also probably go insane at the sheer amount of work and repetition that would take. So in the end, I just wanted to make the video a bit more snappy and a bit more fun and engaging to watch. If you want to see more Spidey, then here are 2 more Spider-Man videos that I've made in the past for you to watch. See you over there.